All right, Doug. Well, welcome to the Coach Me Up podcast. And we introduced you to our guest as a bit of an outside the box guest because to this point, we've had all coaches and players. And so it's good to hear from another aspect of the game. Obviously, we want to hear your faith story, but I'd love to hear your referee story. Like take me through the upbringing of what shapes a world-class official, because I'm excited to hear your story, how it all started.
To be honest with you, I played in high school, a little bit in college, and I was fortunate that one of the guys that refereed my high school games actually was like my little league baseball coach. Although we were really close in age, he's 3 years older than me. But we were working at a sporting goods store named Herman's. It was called Herman's World of Sporting Goods at the time. We're in the back putting up shoes, and I had just finished my freshman year of college. And back then, minimum wage was like $4.25 an hour. And we're putting shoes up, and he's like, "Hey, man, you got any interest in refereeing any basketball?" I said, "Well, how much do you make?" And he said, and this was the summer. It was during the summer. And so I had no formal training or anything. And I said, "Well, how much do you make?" And he said, "Well," he says, $10 a game. I was like, "Well, how long do the games last?" He said, "An hour." I said, "How many games can you work a night?" He said, "3." I said, how many nights a week can I work?" He said, 4. So I'm looking at that, and I was like, you know what? Sign me up. So went to his house, sat down. He got
How old were
back
you?
then I was 19.
19.
It was Beta. It wasn't even VHS tape then. It was like Betamax.
Oh yeah.
And he put his tape in of a high school game. So he was 22. I was 19. He put in he was working high school basketball. Had worked some of my games coming up, and just I'd known him for a long time, and so put the tape in, watched it for about an hour. He gave me a shirt that was a size too big, a pair of those old bike coaches shorts. Remember the bike coaches short, the polyester ones that you softball umpires wore, and a pair of shoes that was a size too small. And we headed to the Hunt YMCA, and I refereed that whole summer with absolutely no formal training whatsoever. And really, technically, I shouldn't have been refereeing because you had to be a member of the organization or the high school board at the time, and I wasn't. And so, somehow he finagled it, so I was able to do it. So that August, I actually joined the high school board and started taking the certification classes, got certified. And 2 years later, I was at a camp, first basketball camp, college officiating camp I'd ever went to. But I hadn't graduated college, nor had I worked the high school varsity game at that point, because my high school board only allowed you to work JV, junior high, kids games, middle school games. And I was fortunate enough to go to a officiating camp run by George Tolliver at James Madison University. And George was in the NBA at the time, and refereed there. And he'd come up to me and he said, "Hey, you've got like a bright future in this. What have you refereed?" And I said, "Well, I've refereed JV girls championship game, and I've refereed some junior high stuff, some middle school stuff." And he goes, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'll be a senior in college next year." And he was like, "Look," he says, "you got to come back next year." He says, "You got to get a year of high school varsity under your belt. You got to graduate college, but come back next year and I will help you." And he did. But it was funny, that camp that I went to, like Scott Foster was a camper at that camp, who is now, in the NBA and has done very well for himself. Sue Blah, who I think is the head of the WNBA now, was in that camp with me. So it's just a really small world, an officiating world. But I was just blessed that I had somebody, his name's Rick Ennis, who ended up he's just been a vital part of my life, who got me into high school officiating and gave me my job that I worked for 17 years when I had a day job, and has been very instrumental in my success. And I was very blessed because he was never threatened or challenged by me. Because Rick worked in the CBA. He got as far as the CBA at one time, and then had gotten married and had some kids, and just the logistics of it didn't work out. But
Couple follow-ups.
that's how I got started.
Yeah, a couple follow-ups, if you don't mind, Jimmy. So number one, I'd say, did you know right away you loved it? Or did you just think this is a good way to earn a living better than
I'll be honest with you, I was really, really bad when I started. I was really, really bad because the impression, what happened was I went out there, I just felt like...
Did you like it, though? Did you like it?
Yes, I like being around it.
Okay.
I like being around basketball.
Okay.
I like being around basketball, but I wasn't necessarily good at it.
Okay. And then, but yet a couple years later, he says you got a bright future. Like, what is it that he saw that, like, were y'all doing practice? Like, are y'all doing games there? Like, how does he know you have a bright future?
Yeah, they had games there, so you had to referee the games. But I was young and I could run, and I had a pretty good feel for what was going on. A lot of it had to do with because my high school supervisor at the time, even though I wasn't certified when I joined, he took an interest in me. And Boo Williams, I'm sure you're familiar with Boo Williams, we would go to all these Boo Williams events and stuff on the weekends, and he just spent, and I'd be there for 6-7 hours just refereeing game after game after game, and he was pouring information into me. So I just really was fortunate to have people in my life that, like I said, took an interest in what I was doing and weren't, developing. And so, the biggest thing was I was young, I could run. And so, and I wouldn't say I was extremely athletic looking, but they're always looking for guys like in that age bracket because you're like a penny stock. I find somebody at 19, 20 might not be very good, but this guy could be developed. I'm into something down the road, and I was just really, really blessed that wherever I went, somebody saw that in me for whatever reason. And I always, my biggest thing was I would tell people was I was young and I could run. Yeah. And so those are things that they're looking for. Even to this day, you see somebody and you're like, man, that guy looks like $1 million. We can teach him to referee. Yeah. But I had some tools that I just had a lot of people pouring into me and giving me an opportunity to work. Because you're never going to be very good. You're never going to be very good at golf. You're never going to be very good at basketball if you don't work, if you don't get the reps and you don't practice. And so I had unlimited amount of work presented to me that a lot of guys, either my age, didn't want to do, or guys that are older than me said, I'm not going out there on Saturday for 6 hours. And, in their defense, they had a wife and kids and family. I didn't. I was 19 years old. I was 20, 21, 22, and just started refereeing. And then I developed a love for it. I developed a love for it because it just it kept me close to the game. Yeah. And I really liked to play. And but I was never going to play in the NBA. I was never going to play Division I basketball. I was probably a Division III player, and that's where I went initially to play basketball. I went away to St. Andrew's Presbyterian College and then transferred back home, and I graduated from Virginia Wesleyan. But I stopped playing after my freshman year of college, and it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
Hey, Doug, how do you handle I can't think of another profession that is persecuted as much as college basketball officials. I mean, from the time you step on the floor 20 minutes before the game to the time the game's over, you're hearing it all. You're within earshot of not only coaches but obviously fans. How do you handle the noise? Because I wouldn't handle it very well.
It's really, really gotten worse due to social media and everybody being an expert in what we do. And you get a close-up look because you're sitting courtside a lot of times. Yep. And I don't have any social media accounts. I don't read any social media accounts. Unfortunately, I have friends, I have family members that will call me and say, hey, this is, and I'm like, I don't have any interest in that. Yeah. And then as far as when you're on the floor, Jimmy, a lot of times it's just like you played. A lot of times you start getting going in the game, you don't even hear it. Especially when especially when it's a really good crowd that that is basketball knowledgeable, and the boos. I know when to expect the boos. I know when not to expect the boos. But I have been in some toxic environments where I know, especially now with my faith walk, that I really, really go to prayer and talk to Him because I've been in some environments that were toxic, and those are not fun. Now, a great college basketball game with enthusiastic fans that are screaming and hollering and booing when they're supposed to, hey, I can deal with that all night long. But when people are threatening your life and every word is profane and just it's crazy, and you live in a place where they got some of the best fans in the world, but the ball can hit a Razorback right in the head, go out of bounds, and you call it to the other team, and they will boo you unmercifully. And it's like, what are you looking? I'm thinking to myself, what are you guys looking at? It hit the guy right. I mean, Stevie Wonder could have got that one right, and yet they boo you unmercifully. There's a passage in Scripture that I kind of go to. I don't have it memorized. I know the gist of it, but I'd like to read it to you if I could. That kind of would help. When I talk to my crew about this too, because we're going to go out there, and really the best referees are the ones that can call 3 against the home team that are hard plays and be right and know that they're going to suffer the repercussions of the fans, the repercussions of the coaches, the repercussions of the media. But 2 Corinthians 4:8-9, it says, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed but not in despair, persecuted but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. And so there's times when I'm out there and that comes to my mind because, man, I'm catching it from everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And all I'm trying to do is what's right. And in my heart, I know this is right. And in the video evidence will prove that I'm right. Yet everybody around me and my crew is caving in because when we walk out there, I tell my crew all the time, I say, guys, look, here's the deal. We're not black officials. We're not white officials. We're officials. We're all zebras. We're wearing a black and white striped shirt, and that's what they see, and that's what they don't like. And that's what causes the vigilance and and I wouldn't say hatred. I would hope people don't hate me, but I think that they probably, in their hearts at times they do. But and that's what, at times, how do you handle the noise? That's what kind of gets frustrating to me is, hey, I'm a husband. I have kids. I have grandkids. I'm no different than you, but all you seeing is black and white striped shirt. So you know what? In your mind, you're going, okay, he wants this or he deserves this because he decided to do this. And there is some truth to that.
Yeah.
But we're all human beings and we're all going to make mistakes. We don't get them all right.
Yeah. Well, every game you all have is a road game, right? There are no home games for the officials.
Absolutely.
Which is something to think about. I know as a player, I used to think all the time, like, I think God gave me this wisdom. They're not booing me. They're booing the way I'm playing. And I'm not playing well. I'm booing me. I'm not, and so I learned early, and I don't take any credit for this. I feel like God gave me this wisdom to try not to take it personal. Now, you guys get so much venom because but they're, I would think that the mindset of they don't hate me, they just hate the call I made would be helpful. But I always wonder because, Jimmy, we talk about all the time in the SEC, the top 5 teams in the SEC almost never lose at home. Like ever, right? Like Kentucky, Auburn, Tennessee, Bama,
Alabama,
Arkansas. They don't lose at home. I think it was 2 years ago they didn't lose at home. I think like every team was undefeated at home except maybe Arkansas lost once or something. It was like all 4 of them went undefeated at home. And that has to be part of officiating, right? Like I would think that is one of the hardest things to call a play in those toxic, crazy, loud environments against the home team, especially down the stretch. That has to be hard.
Well, I don't really think of it like that. I'm just looking at a play, and you just react, and I have a split second to react. Mm-hmm. And I got to be honest with you, I might look at something and go, okay, what have we had transpired so far in this game? And does this fit to what we've called now to be consistent? But I never look at it and go, okay, I have to call this because this is for the home team, or I have to call this because it's against the visiting team. And what's funny is, people will say, man, they're undefeated at home. Well, I can tell you one of the biggest mysteries in the history of my officiating career is how I can go referee a team at home and they look like they could beat the Celtics that had Bill Russell, and then I can referee them 2 weeks later on the road, and it looks like they've never played basketball before in their life. And I don't understand that, but I know it's 18 to 21-year-old kids, but I don't understand that. But some teams are just really, really good at home.
Yeah.
And some teams, and then when they go on the road, they're not very good. And you could say, well, the officiating's all homers. Well, you know what? Then you're insulting the home crowd, the coaches, the players. It really isn't, because I would hope that, and I don't look up the stuff or whatever, as far as in games that I've officiated, what the home record was, the visiting record. But I can tell you this: teams play better when they're at home for whatever reason, and I don't know what it is. The rim's still 10 feet high, the court's the same length, the same width. But, there's the thing to be said for, the fans and the adrenaline and things of that nature. But it never crosses my mind, is this against the home team or the visiting team? What does cross my mind is this decision I make, is it consistent with what we've done all evening?
Hey, Doug, last officiating question, because I hear people all the time, they can make bad calls and get away with it. There's no accountability. They just move on to the next game. Wrong. Talk about the layers of accountability on officials after every game and prior to the next game? Quickly,
Yeah.
please. I think it's really interesting.
Yes, we have iPads, so we can actually, some of the leagues I'm in, they bring the iPad in at halftime, and you can look at plays that you've had. We can get text messages at halftime from coordinators, but we have conference coordinators that we have to answer to after every game, and we have access to all the plays. What's tough in our business is so much of it is subjective. You could ask 5 people, look at the same play, and get 5 different answers.
Mm-hmm.
So, but when you talk about layers of accountability, it's not in the public. But we have guys that lose games. Now, we don't get fined, and they don't put it in the newspaper, but if I misapply a rule or I screw something up bad, like really, it's hard for them to penalize us for judgment because, it's a split-second decision, but based on time and score and when it happened and what the ramifications were, we lose games. So I didn't get fined, but if I lose a game, there's a lot of money that's involved with that game fee because I don't get paid unless I work. Now, could we put that in the newspaper? Yeah, I guess we could, but we would embarrass the official. I don't mean by embarrassment, but here's the deal. If I do, is the public going to be any more happy because I lost a game? Are they going to think any less of me or any more of me or any more of the thing? They're going to say, it's not enough. He should have lost 2 games. So we're held, and I will tell you this, there's not one official that wants to miss a play. And I've had many sleepless nights on plays that I've missed or I've messed up or I can't sleep. And so we hold ourselves accountable, or I hold myself accountable much more to a higher degree than any of my coordinators or my bosses do.
Yeah.
Because once again now, every single game is on television. I can make a call right now, and it's in Japan in a matter of seconds. Everything goes viral. So if you're thinking I'm doing that on purpose or I'm wanting that attention, you're wrong. And here's the other thing too. All we do as officials is react to what happens on the floor. We react to what a coach says. We react to what a player does. We don't go, this is not scripted. It's not, I have some people say, oh, you got it out for that guy. I don't even know that guy.
Yeah.
I've had coach, fans or people, or coach will say to me, oh, you don't like me. I got to be honest with you, sir. I don't really even know you. I'm with you for 2 hours in a hostile environment. I don't like the way you're acting, but I don't know you well enough to know to go, hey, man, I don't really like you because there's a lot of dudes that I don't like the way they act. But I'd love to have a beer with them after the game because I think they're pretty good dudes.
Well, on that note,
put.
I know Jimmy said he had this, but I could ask you a million more questions.
Yeah,
Specifically,
go ahead.
how miserable it must be to be an NBA official and deal with those guys all night long. But anyway, maybe we'll do that next time we have you on. But you guys got to deal with the coaches. Right? The players I know somewhat, but really in your world, you're dealing with the coaches. We'll keep it lighthearted. Give me some funny, maybe fun refereeing story about a moment or a time where you had a great interaction with a coach or some sort of memorable moment in your career, maybe a famous coach, something that our listeners would enjoy.
Here's a funny story because you wanted to tie in about officiating. So, like I said, I played in high school. And when I was 15 years old in 1985, I went to Duke University's basketball camp. So I went there, just normal kid. No, it's not a high-profile camp. You pay your money, you go, whatever, you get put on teams. And so I went there, played at the Duke University basketball camp in 1985. Got Johnny Dawkins' autograph. Remember that vividly. So here it is. Now we're in 2014, I think, and I had Duke and Mike Krzyzewski, and I'm walking him back to his huddle, and I said, "You don't know this, but I was at your basketball camp in 1985." He goes, "Really?" I go, "Yeah." And at that time, he was there, but he wasn't. All his assistants ran to camp and everything. You see him, he'd pop in and pop out and all that stuff. And so I said, "Yeah, I was at your basketball camp in 1985." I said, "You remember that?" And he was like, "No, I don't." I said, "Well, I had a chance to meet you because you watched me play in a game." And he goes, "Okay." And I said, "You remember what you told me?" And he goes, "No." And I said, "You said, I think you probably make a very good official." I said, "Because I couldn't play." and he just smiled. He goes, "I didn't say that." I said, no, you didn't. But I was at that basketball camp in 1985. So yeah, I just looked at him and said, "You told me I'd make a very good official."
Well, I got one more. This is Coach Me Up podcast. So Coach Up, we got a lot of youth sports parents that listen to us, me included, and coaches, youth sport coach. Coach Up the youth sports world on a helpful mindset with dealing with umpires and officials?
Do you understand how big of a shortage there is in finding those people? I mean, you're fortunate just to have anybody out there. And I would just tell you, as you get ready to criticize or scream or holler, that until you do it, or until you're in their shoes, it's just like our walk in faith. You know, there's so many things, my coordinators that I look at differently now that I found Christ. Because all I was worried about was my schedule. But I never sat behind the computer screen and they have to deal with 90 officials on their roster. But all I'm worried about is me. I've never walked in their shoes. So I could tell you those people that are out there, they're not getting paid a lot of money to listen to that. I just saw a thing where J.J. Redick got dumped in an 8-year-old game.
Wait, he got thrown out of
And
an
he was
8-year-old game? J.J. did?
Yeah, and he talked about it. And here's the deal. The story he told, he really didn't do much to get ejected. But those guys are going to make mistakes. And once again, I got a ton of respect for Fran Fraschilla. Fran Fraschilla came to a referee camp and actually refereed. So what I would do, if whoever runs those youth leagues, if I was him, I'd make every parent referee a game. And then let them just referee one game, and I think you'd have a totally different perspective. But at the end of the day, whether you win, whether you lose, life goes on. It's not the end of the world. Nobody died. And I just think we make sports, I think it's great. I think you have a winner, you have a loser. But at the end of the day, that mistake, or the 9-year-old, your 9-year-old is going to reflect the way you act in those stands. So if you want to act like a maniac, a maniac, what do you think your kid's going to emulate? I tell coaches that all the time. Players are going to emulate their coaches. And they say, why is that coach so good? I said, look at him in crucial or chaotic moments. Jay Wright, that guy hits a shot at the buzzer. He goes, boom. 2006 National Championship game. How do Villanova kids play?
Calm.
They reflect their coach.
Yep.
So I would just tell you, I don't say a word to referees. When I go to games, I watch my friends' kids play, my grandkids play. I look at it and go, I've walked in their shoes. And until you do that, it's really hard because all you see is little Johnny or Sally out there playing. And you know what? That person that's doing that game, here's the deal. What are you going to do if that person doesn't show up to referee a game?
What do you got then?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the way that this thing's going, there's a lot of youth sports, there's a lot of high school sports being cut out because they don't have officials.
Yeah.
It's a good word.
Hey, Doug, I love your story. We could spend 2 hours on your faith story, but we've got 15, 18 minutes left. I've listened to you talk, and you said that several years ago in the SEC tournament, Tony Green, a tremendous official, Tony Green stood in front of all you officials at the SEC tournament and basically said, we everyone in this room needs Jesus. I think your heart started stirring after that conversation with Tony. Can you reflect back on that? And then I want to just kind of quickly go through your faith journey with us, please.
Yeah. See, in my whole career, that was the first time. It's probably, I'd say 13 years ago, 14 years ago, where I'd actually heard an official talk anything about Jesus Christ or faith in my business.
Yeah. And
so when he got up in front of the group and did that, and just broke down in tears. And he basically was saying, we need to be more grateful. We need to be more thankful. We need to realize what Jesus has done for us. We need to realize that not everybody gets this opportunity. And we need to be thankful for all that he's given us. And I'll be honest with you, I heard the message, I hugged him, but I didn't understand the message.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I got baptized in December of 2019, and I happened to get baptized in Dallas, Texas. Darren George, a fellow official's father, baptized me in his church in Allen, Texas, prior to a game. Well, guess who I was refereeing with that night?
Tony
Green. And you say there's coincidence where God's plan is perfect. God works there's no coincidences. It's all God driven. And so that night, I have an 8:30 game at SMU, and I get to the game, and I get in there, and my wife is my wife at the time was my girlfriend at the time, and she's with me, and Tony knows her very well, and said, hey, what are you guys doing here? And she looked at Tony and said, Doug got baptized tonight. And he just looked at me and hugged me, and I looked at him and I said, at the SEC tournament, when you got in front of us, I didn't understand what you meant. I understand now.
Yeah.
What was the prompting of his getting up and talking? Was it like a
No, it was, and that was
how many were in the
one
room?
crazy
what
thing.
Was the
But
setting?
there's 16 of us in the room. There's 16 officials. There's probably 4 observers, coordinators in there. So there's probably 20 to 25 of us in the room, and he just did it. We finished the meeting, and before we were to, he's like, "You guys are dismissed." And Tony said, "Can you guys hold on a second?" And he just stood up and did it. There was no prompting. There was just.
So
And it was just on his heart.
meeting. It's just a meeting.
Yeah, we had games that day in the SEC tournament. It was that morning, and he just got up and just really shared his heart. And to this day, I don't know why he did it, other than I'm assuming the Lord said, "Hey, you need to do this." Mm-hmm. And maybe it touched. I don't know about the other 15 people in the room, but there might have been somebody that took them to Christ or that got them closer to Christ. I'm going to be honest with you. I wouldn't say that it got me any closer to Christ, but I remembered it because it was the only time anybody had ever talked about Jesus Christ in my business.
Wow.
It certainly planted a seed.
As far as officiating.
Planted a seed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Doug, I think it was a few years later, you were actually on a Monday getting ready to call the national championship game at the Final Four, and that afternoon you went and saw the movie I Can Only Imagine. And I've heard you say that you got up maybe before the movie was even done and went to the restroom and had a heart-to-heart talk with yourself. Tell us about that experience, please.
It just, it was that's the pinnacle of officiating career. And so Monday the game's at 9 o'clock. Didn't have a lot of, so it's like, all right, what I'm going to do to kill the time? I'm a big moviegoer. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, was there. And a dear friend of mine, Keith Patterson, who really had a lot to do with my faith walk, was there at the Final Four as well. And I was like, let's go see a movie. Well, the only one that fit time-wise was I Can Only Imagine.
Okay.
And I kind of knew it was about the song. I knew the song. I knew the song had something to do with Jesus, but I didn't know the background story of the song. And also at that time, my father, who I wasn't close to growing up, tough childhood background, 8 divorces by the time I was 8 years old, kicked out when I was 18. Really, my dad lived 77 years. I might have lived with him for 5. Yep. From the time I was 1 to 3 and 6 to 8. So I really didn't know him very well. But my dad had Alzheimer's at the time, was going through some stuff. I wasn't close to him. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching this movie. And then I see the background story on it. And the struggles that this young man had with his father. And his father was getting ready to die. My father was getting ready to die. Didn't know when. I'm supposed to be refereeing that night. And, it just hit me like a ton of bricks about what life was about. And so I went to the bathroom and I'm looking in the mirror and I'm just like, dude, you got to get better. And at that time, now I have grandchildren. I'm not married to my girlfriend, but we have grandchildren. And I'm carrying a different role with them than I've ever had before. And I'm sitting there and I'm just looking in the mirror and I said, you got to get better. Because I got to be honest with you, Jimmy, if all I'm going to be known for when I'm done is blowing a whistle. I really struggle with that a lot in my officiating career, because all I do is blow a whistle.
Yeah.
And for a long time I didn't think that was very important, but I also now understand that's the platform God's given me. That's God's work.
Yeah.
So you know what? Don't insult that. This is the work that I've given you, and the platform that I've given you. Would I rather be playing in the NBA Finals? Yeah. That wasn't meant for me. But so I'm literally sobbing, looking in the mirror going, man, you got to get better. You got to be better. Because what you're doing ain't working. You might be successful. You might be working a national championship game tonight, but that ain't the answer. And a lot of it had to do with my relationship with my girlfriend at the time, my father. It just kind of, the whole thing just kind of came to head. And I'll tell you one other story about how God works.
Okay.
So we pull into the hotel on Sunday. The street that the hotel was on was Bowie Street. And that doesn't mean anything to you, but as I'm driving the car, I look up and I see Bowie. My high school commissioner's name was Dick Bowie, who had passed away. The hotel's on Bowie Street, and that's the sign I see. And to me, it just was like, this is the guy that took an interest in you, that got you here. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And in this movie, I'm watching this movie, and all these things are going through, and it's just like that whole weekend was just like crazy. But that movie, The Mercy Me, the backstory on their band, but I'm just telling you, it really triggered a lot of emotions in me. I had divorced parents, so the split up of the parents in that movie, and then the fact that, right when he got to know his father as a Christian and he actually liked his father passed away. And I don't know if my father was a Christian when he died or not. I know his wife was, and my stepmother, and that's probably the best thing my father left me was my stepmother, to see that there was good in him because this woman was devoted and just took care of him. She was a saint, and in my heart I go, there had to have been something good in him because somebody would take care of him over 5 years through this Alzheimer's deal. There was something good in him. Maybe I didn't see it, but it's there.
Doug, let me ask you a follow-up on the staring in the mirror and saying, I got to get better. At what point, because this is probably I know it's still a lesson I got to wrestle with all the time, but early in my faith walk, I had to really wrestle with this. At what point did you realize your better is not good enough to save yourself? And that actually it's about submission and obedience, not self-improvement? Because I know for me, I like, give me boxes to check, give me a mountain to climb. Sometimes the hardest thing we can do is go, even my best is filthy rags. Thank God for grace. I just love to hear, because it starts off with, okay, God has convicted me of my sin. I need to do better. But then, at least for me, it was a journey into, wait, I need to submit, recognize my sinfulness, and then let him use me humbly. So I don't know if that makes sense or where you're at on that. I'd just love to hear you. How have you grown from that initial kind of face-to-face?
Well, so like I said, I had a rough childhood growing up. Didn't talk about a lot, but what was happening in my adult life was I was letting it affect my relationships. But I was too prideful to say that. And so what happens is as you kind of go through life, in my subconscious, it was I wasn't good enough. I got kicked out. The people that loved me, that cared for me, kicked me out. But as I got into my adult life and my faith walk, and I'll get back to your first question, is I now look at it like I wasn't walking in their shoes. I don't know what my mother had to go through with the divorces. I don't know what my stepfather, who kicked me out, was going through in his life. But in August of 2019, I went to a Referees Embracing Faith conference. And I was a fan. I wasn't a follower of Christ, I would say then. And I sat there for 8 hours, and they just poured into his word. And I just kept having all these emotions flow over me. And I never prayed to God about, why did they kick me out or it's your fault to kick me out. I acknowledge God, and every once in a while I thank him for something good happening. But that was never on my radar. And nor was I talking to him about what happened to me back then. And I went for 8 hours, poured into the word, and I just couldn't stop weeping the whole time. And I'm like, what is going on? And then you start seeing, as these people are talking about his word, you see how the pieces of the puzzle of your life all start to fit together, but you never saw it before because you were never looking. And so I'm sitting there and I'm hearing this stuff about these people that have come into my life that have helped me. And Keith Patterson, who I met at a camp in 2015 and 2017, he sits down in a hotel room, and I said, this lady on this plane asked me, do I know if Jesus Christ loves me? And I never talked to anybody on a plane. I'm asleep, and I'm like, I think that woman was put there for a reason. This was in 2017, and he was like, absolutely. He goes, I was put in your life for a reason. He goes, he never mentioned Christianity or religion. I just know he was a really good person. And he's like, how many times, my wife's name is Tiv, how many times Tiv and I have had conversations about you and finding the Lord? I'm like, no. And so August 2019, we leave that 8-hour deal, and we're having dinner, and they go, do you understand people don't believe in Jesus Christ? I said, you're kidding me. I said, everybody believes in Jesus Christ. He said, no, there's people that don't believe. And I said, well, I believe. They go, really? And I said, yeah. And I said, but what does that mean? So that night, as I go to sleep in a hotel room, I can't stop weeping. Weep all night, get on a plane. I'm on a plane. I'm literally weeping, and I'm sleeping. I put my head like this because I don't want people to know that I'm weeping. And I'm like, if this flight attendant asks me if I'm okay, am I going to tell her I have an allergy attack, or I'm going to tell her, man, something's going on here? And I just literally, I'd heard the voice before, but I didn't know who it was when my dad had passed away 2 months earlier. And I put my, and then I hear this voice and it says, stop crying. I took you out of that house. You didn't get thrown out. That was my plan for you. You didn't understand it, but I've been here the whole time. And when he said that, he goes, I'm your father. You were never alone. And that's the voice I hear. And I say that to people. And to be honest with you, Jimmy, Chris, I thought I was hearing, I thought I was kind of losing my mind. I'd heard the same voice the night before my father passed away. I went to Florida. My stepmother called and said, look, you got to get here. My other siblings didn't go. And to be honest, in my heart, I'm like, she only knew the good years. She didn't know the alcoholic years. She didn't know this. She didn't know that, because he never told her that. And that's not his fault. But I did see the Spirit of the Lord work, the Holy Spirit work, because when I got there and I saw him laying there and he's unconscious and I just started to pray. Like, Lord, take him. Please take him. I know it's going to be hard, and please take him. And then that night he couldn't talk. I don't know if he could hear or not. And I just, Lord, please take him. Please take him. Please take him. And then I couldn't, once again, the second time that ever happened was in August. This was in June of 2019. I'm weeping. And I hear this voice says, you got to be his voice. You got to be his voice to console her, which was my stepmother. And so when I went in the next morning, I said, look, you got to tell him it's okay to go. And I said, you got to let him know, because I know him. And I said, you got to let him know it's okay for him to go. And so she sat there and she said it was okay to go. And 2 hours later, he passed. And I didn't hear that voice again until in August. And so then I didn't really understand what it was. So then I called Darren George, who's a fellow official, whose father's a pastor, who baptized me that December of 2019. I called him. I said, I met him one time, talked to him a couple times after that, took a liking to him. And every time I would see Darren, he said, hey, my dad's praying for you, because he knew I wasn't a Christian. He knew I wasn't, not necessarily not a believer, but I wasn't walking in faith. And I called him. I said, Dennis, I got to talk to you. I said, man, I'm struggling. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I've got this stuff going on. I'm hearing these voices. He said, that's the Holy Spirit. And I said, really? And I said, my father passed. I had this deal. And I feel like something's happening within me, and I don't really understand it. And so we talked about some things, and I had some relationship issues with who's now my wife, because I couldn't commit to her. And it was nothing that she did. It was all me. It was all my prideful self that, hey, she's lucky to have me. And a lot of that is because the people in my life that loved me, who I thought loved me, had left me. But when that voice said to me, he said, that was my plan. They didn't leave you. This is what I wanted for you. This was my plan for you. And then I look back on it, and then I feel guilty, because he was there the whole time. Now, everybody says his timing is perfect. It took me 50 years to find him. But I really, really believe that had I sought him sooner, it's like one of the scriptures is, when you seek me with all your heart, you'll find me. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until that time that he knew, you're seeking me with all your heart, which is advice I give to my friends. It's very simple. You can't be a 7-Eleven Jesus. You can't be when it's convenient for you. When you seek him to find him with your whole heart, he'll come to you. Because he doesn't need us. He doesn't need us. He chooses us. There's nothing I can do to glorify God. His work speaks for itself. And so that deal, like I said, when I heard that voice, I got home that day. My wife was at church with her mother. At the time, once again, was my girlfriend. And I'm walking to the house, and I just start crying. And I'm just like, God, he's been there the whole time. He always had me. I never had to be worried. I never had to worry about this. And yet, he was there. I had a father. I had someone that loved me. And I just got on my knees right then, and I said, God, I'm yours. Take me where you want to go. I surrender. Because you just gave me the answer to what I had been carrying internally for so long. And so when he did that, like I said, I surrendered. That was in August of 2019. September and I'm not trying to give Jimmy a plug, I got your book. Because I felt some things and I Googled faith-based sports books, because I know if it was faith-based and it had sports involved, I would be more inclined to read it.
Yeah.
So I started reading your book, and there were some things in there that really hit home. And I think I've told you this before. The thing you said in there, you said the greatest obedience to God is to forgive. And so my mother, who I hadn't talked to in 30 years, I knew in my heart then what that message was, is I've got to forgive her, because I was close to her. And so I didn't do it right away. I ended up writing a letter. But then the following year, I just went to their house, rang the doorbell. And it was the first time I've been in that house in 33 years. And we have a great relationship now.
Praise God, man.
But
That's
for
awesome.
so long, I'd always thought about, how it affected me. And as I've gotten into this walk in faith, man, she had it rough too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what was going on in her mind. And like I said, my stepfather, he had some things going on. But I never had a conversation with him about that, as far as when I was growing up as a kid, and probably shouldn't have. And then the other thing I did once I read your book, Jimmy, in October, I never discussed really any of this with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And in October 2019, I read the story about in your book about Rick Barnes and about what his daughter said to him. And I said, oh my God. I said, if my granddaughter said that to me, I would tell her she's absolutely correct. I've got to make some changes. Mm-hmm. And when I sat down, and at that time, my wife didn't realize, I talked to Dennis, and I was going to get baptized in December in Dallas. I'd already had it all set up. At that time, we have our basketball schedule in October. And I sat her down, and I said, Tiv, I said, you know what? I apologize. I'm sorry for the way that I've been with you over these years. I've known her for 22 years at that point. We dated about 19 of them. We had a lot of ups and downs and things of that nature. And when I surrendered to God, the first thing he said to me was, you know what? I brought you this girl. You've screwed up a ton of times, and yet I keep bringing her back to you. This is the one that I want you to be with. And you got to get over the commitment issues. You got to get over the stuff you've been carrying, because this is who I brought you. And so at that time, I told her that, I'm going through some changes. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. And I just wanted to let you know that, I just want to let you know that I'm sorry for the things I've done to you and said to you. And that my heart is with God now. And she broke down. And then she said, Doug, I've been praying for you. My mother's been praying for you. And all I ever wanted you to do was find the Lord. If it meant me being with you or if it meant me not being with you, I just wanted you to find Christ. And that hit me. It was like, because all I ever thought she wanted to do was just, hey, I want to get married, because that's what, hey, I want to get married, I want to get married, I want to get married. And it wasn't anything about that. And right when she told me that, I was like, I'm marrying this girl. And then we got married in August of 2020. And I tell you what, we were engaged in 2001 and we called it off. And I'd be telling you about my divorce right now if I had gotten married then. Because this is what I could tell you. I think you want to ask if I've had a conversation with a fellow official about faith and things of that nature. I've had several with divorce is big in our business. Infidelity can be big in our business. And I've talked to several of them about, until you get your relationship right with God, you're not going to have any good relationships. And so I tell them, I said, it's easy for me to say this, but my relationship was never going to be right with my mother, was never going to be right with my wife, was never going to be right with my grandkids, because of what I was carrying, until I got my relationship right with God. And we've been married since August of 2020. And when you have a relationship that's based on what that Bible says about marriage, you're going to have your issues, but they're not disasters. There's not tornadoes. They're not hurricanes, because you're grounded in His Word, and you're grounded in what the word marriage means and the covenant that you made with God when you said I do.
Doug, I can't thank you enough for your transparency, your how authentic your story has been with us. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there for our listeners to embrace and dive into. But I love it when people speak from their heart. I know Chris does as well, and we have to keep in mind that, man, like you said, that you just don't know until you've walked in someone else's shoes. You're talking about in officiating, but just in life in general. So, man, thank you so much for your time. You're one of our favorite guests just because you've been real and authentic, and a changed man is Doug Sirmons because of what Jesus has done in his life,
What a story,
Chris.
man. What a story. Thanks for pouring that out to us. There's a lot of layers there. Hopefully we'll have you back one day to talk some other things. But, man, I just appreciate your transparency, because as men, man, that can be hard. So thanks for modeling that.
Well done, Doug.
Thank you. Appreciate it.